So Fallout 76 has a new update, the long-awaited Wastelanders update, that adds new NPCs, new dialogue systems, a new main story, and several new factions. But does it change the state of the game? Let's find out. So of course the main selling point of Wastelanders is the addition of new human NPCs that will give you quests, speak to you, fill out previously uninhabited world spaces, and just in general make the world feel more alive than it previously did. The voice acting on these NPCs is done fairly well, although I did notice that for some reason, some audio for certain characters was just really quiet, and I really had to turn up my volume and turn down sound effects quite a bit to even hear them. The ally system is a good example of that. For whatever reason, Beckett was just a very quiet speaking character, and I could rarely hear him, and I had to turn subtitles on just to understand what he was telling me. These NPCs are written fairly well too, although there is a lot of NPCs that are named that just kind of serve no purpose in the area that they inhabit. The raiders are a good example of that. There's several named raiders in the crater that just don't really serve a purpose other than to just talk to you and give you some light lore. Speaking of talking to you, Wastelanders adds a new dialogue system, much like the ones from previous Fallout games or even more recently, the Outer Worlds. Dialogue options will change depending on how far you've progressed through the main story of the game, what level you are, what your skills are, what your special stats are, or even certain quests you've completed previously. There's much special dialogue if you've completed the main story of Fallout 76 prior to installing Wastelanders. Speaking of main story, Wastelanders adds a new overarching main story that can run in tandem or after the existing main story of Fallout 76. People have returned to Appalachia, separating themselves mostly into 3 or 4 separate factions. To the south, there are the Settlers of Foundation, looking to reclaim and rebuild the world as it once was. To the north, there are vicious raiders that live in a crashed space station known as the Crater. They are looking to rob, steal, rape, and murder anything that they need to get by in Appalachia. An offshoot gang of the gang from the Craters, the Blood Eagles, are an even more vicious set of raiders that just will attack you on sight. And then there's the Mothman Cult, a group of religious fanatics that worship a cryptid that may or may not actually be wandering the Appalachian wilderness. The main story will have you helping out the raiders and settlers with various odd jobs and busy work until you're finally forced to pick a side. Odd jobs for the raiders include scavenging parts to help fix their communications equipment and taking out former raiders that have run off with some of their loot, and helping the settlers involves mostly collecting stolen equipment that the raiders have taken. These quests are repeatable on a daily basis and don't really serve too much of a purpose other than increasing your reputation with said faction and getting a small amount of treasury notes to exchange for a new currency, gold bullion. The main story isn't super long and or intricate. If you're starting from a new game, I'd imagine it's a lot more interesting, but me, I was almost a level 100 with several hundred hours in Fallout 76, and I beat the game within, I'd say, probably 10 hours. That's not to say I didn't have fun, because I did. I was just, I don't know, I was expecting something maybe a little bit longer and wasn't so simple. It feels like it kind of just ended after a bit. This all depends on where Bethesda goes from here, but I don't really see a long-lasting effect of these settlers. They just kind of stick to their corners of the map. They don't really interact with you too much outside of these daily quests and the main story. That's with the exception of wandering traders that you could run into every once in a while. Fallout 76's quest structure and dialogue system suffers in the same ways Fallout 4's did, in my opinion. There's a few choices that seem apparent, but there's really only one choice. All of the other dialogue options don't really go anywhere, and it's just needless dialogue that doesn't really lead to anything. There's several instances where a character will come to you with a problem, and then there's several options of, here's different ways that you should do this, and then they'll just be like, nah, that won't work, and you have to do it one certain way. They even brought back skill checks depending on your specials, perks, certain things like that, but they don't give you XP. They don't give you certain quest rewards. They just are kind of there, which I'm all for more dialogue options, but they don't reward you with anything. They're just there. They don't go nowhere. The charisma check will more or less just impress the NPC that you're so charismatic, and then that's kind of it. At the very least, I wish it gave you XP, but as it serves right now, the skill checks are just sort of there. Now, granted, I didn't select every perk option and every skill check, so there may be one or two that do give you some reward, but in my experience, I didn't see any. Another thing that Wastelanders adds is what the game calls allies, and these are certain NPCs that will take up residence at your camp and have a short sort of quest line that you can help them out with. They have romance options too. They're very similar to companions, but they don't follow you in the wasteland and will just stay at your camp giving you quests. Structure-wise, these are by far the worst part of Wastelanders, in my opinion. They are very basic fetch quests. Go here, get this item, go here, kill this enemy. And they don't deviate from that until like the end of their chain. And these aren't exactly super short quest chains either. These can go on for 4 or 5 hours, and I'd say 90% of them are just fetch quests. The stories that these characters tell are pretty interesting. It's just the quests you have to go through to get to the end of the chain are just some of the most boring missions I've done in Fallout 76. Honestly, they are. There's several quests where NPCs will follow you into interiors to help you fight enemies, but they are honestly beyond useless. They are more in the way than anything. They do insignificant amounts of damage to the enemies that you're fighting, and truthfully, they don't serve any purpose other than to just be there for the story. They go down super easy. They don't do enough damage to really help the matter when you're fighting enemies, and they can't revive you. So if you go down, you're still pretty much screwed if you're not in a team. I enjoyed my time with Wastelanders. I really did. I think it's a very much needed addition to the Fallout 76, system. I've played for about 20, 30 hours, and I honestly feel like I've kind of seen everything that Wastelanders has to offer in terms of quests and new things to see. Upon completion of the main story, a premium currency known as gold bullion unlocks, and the only way to get gold bullion is from certain quest rewards, and certain daily objectives will give you treasury notes in which you can exchange for the gold bullion at the settlements. The only places you can spend these gold bullions are at the settlements, whether it be the Crater or at Foundation, with special merchants there, and they'll only take gold bullion, and in exchange you'll get certain rare loot, rare guns, rare armor, stuff like that. I haven't really messed with this too much because it doesn't really seem super worth it. You don't really even get to see like the stats of the gear you're buying, so it's really kind of a gamble unless you know what you're going into. Wastelanders definitely brings Fallout 76 to the point it should have been at when it launched. These NPCs should have been in the game from the start. There's no question about that in my mind. But now 76 is where it always should have been. And if Bethesda continues to move in this direction, it's only going to get better from here. But this still is Fallout 76, and there are quite a few glitches that I ran into, from NPCs just kind of glitching out and like spazzing all over the place. Then there's quests that would not progress unless I did them in a very particular way that the game wanted me to do them. Certain quests would not progress the objective, even though I had completed the objective it wanted me to. I had to leave and come back a few times to get those quests to progress. I feel like Wastelanders is a way more engaging experience if you're starting a new character or new to Fallout 76 in general. The game feels way more structured to the newer player. Not saying that older players and returning players can't enjoy this, but it definitely feels like there's more dialogue options and more of a structure for players that are brand new and starting their journey in Appalachia just now. To me, Wastelanders is everything I thought it would be, for better and for worse, to be honest. I expected the dialogue to be kind of questionable. Bethesda doesn't really have a good track record recently when it comes to dialogue systems and quest structures, but the NPCs do make the world feel significantly more inhabited and honestly lively. It just feels way better to walk around a world where you know that there's people living in and that your choices are affecting the people that live in that world. Appalachia was already a pretty engaging world, but with the addition of NPCs, it brings it up that next level that it needed. If you've been burned or turned off by Fallout 76 in the past, or have just been watching the dumpster fire for the last year and a half, I recommend at least trying it. I think it's a significant enough of a change to warrant at least trying it out. However, I don't think it's a big enough change to bring back people who don't like the multiplayer aspects or just don't really enjoy Bethesda Fallout games as a whole. The game still isn't perfect, but no game is. But Bethesda's taken great strides to recover from its disastrous launch, and I think that's worth mentioning, because it would have been really easy for them to just abandon this game after the dumpster fire it started as and completely move on and forget about it, but they didn't. They listened to the community and, have been adding things and putting in content that they've asked for, and I think that's really admirable in the grand scheme of things. Think of how many games that have had a terrible launch, but nowadays are considered top tier games like Rainbow Six Siege. I think the main takeaway is that the framework that they added in Wastelanders is a great step in the right direction. While Wastelanders itself is decent, I'm really excited for what's to come now that they have this framework in place. Now that they have these things in place, Bethesda has the opportunity to make some really big moves with this game in the future, and I can't wait to see what they do next. Thank you for joining me for my overview of Fallout 76's Wastelanders add-on. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe, and I don't know when I'll upload again, because I don't know when I'll have something to talk about again. So I'll see y'all when I see y'all. Peace.